Hello, the internet. All right, so we've got a globe we're working on here to start off with. I'm just going to go over a couple basics as we get started here. So I'm Nick. I'm running the Naves Guild here. We're going to be working on a few different things to do with the world of Gethra, and that is what you're looking at right here. I've got another map here, shows us a bit more detail of one of the areas where most of the story has been set so far. But as one of my projects going forward, I'm going to be building on this into a whole entire world, and I'd like to eventually see that in the form of a globe. So I've been working in 3D here, as you can see. So for the first part of my stream, I'm just going to be working on continuing my coastline. I've got a rough continent mapped out here, and we're going to be doing a bit more detail there. And I'll be kind of going over some basics of how I'm making both a two-dimensional map and a three-dimensional map at once, which is something maybe other map makers would like to know how to do. After that, we'll be moving into a podcast segment where I will be reading the existing Lives of Gethra stories. Those are available on livesofgethra.com. That's lives-of-gethra.com. And you can find the links and everything in my About. We'll be doing a couple audio versions of the first few chapters of the storyline there at Lives of Gethra, and then after that, if there's still time, we will get some interaction going with viewers, and kind of flushing out the world of Gethra with everyone's input. All right, so let's get in here and start working on some coastline. I'm using Adobe Photoshop, where I've made a really rough version. I'll show you that here as well. And in here I've got my tectonic plates, and I've got my glacial zones from the receding ice caps of the world of Gethra, and that helps me figure out whether the coastlines are going to be rough or smooth. Basically, like if you look at Earth's map, you've got zones where there's a lot of ruggedness to the coast, and you've got areas where there's lots of beach. And so I'll be looking at, I'll be referring to that as I do a lot more detail in here in the 3D model. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, feel free to chip in. Again, first time streaming, so kind of just diving in with some of the basics so that I can just talk over top of myself here. And then we'll move on to some more interactive stuff later. Just got to erase my pre-existing coastline here. And again, this area is fairly smooth coasted. Went a little off there. Save myself some time. I do little segments where so I can still follow the guideline of the coast, but not go back and forth with the drawing tools here. This is just in Blender 3D editing kind of freeware, so it's kind of a useful tool. Not something super common in maps and such. It looks like my tablet is not set up right here. Here, let's work up here for now. Oops. Yeah, the downside of using Blender is the actual art kind of tools are not quite strong. My plan is to move, once we've got a good kind of 3D globe working here, we can translate that into 2D in Photoshop and do a lot more detail. And that will be where we get results looking a bit more like this, with a lot more going on and a lot more pleasing to look at, of course. Maybe I'll just talk about some of the other stuff I've got going on here on my channel. Um, so this world that I'm designing here, Lives of Gethra, or the world of Gethra, it's been a bit of a collaborative effort already where on my website, livesofgethra.com, I have a lot of people kind of contributing their role as characters, almost like a role-playing game or Dungeons and Dragons or something like that. And that gives us kind of a story that as an author, I get to bring in other people's personalities and see how these characters would interact and the decisions that characters would make that I myself as an author might not make. And so, kind of from the beginning, Gethra has been a world with interaction at its heart. So later on in the stream here, we'll move on to kind of a world building segment where I will actually have my viewers take on the role of characters and get to decide, what those characters do, whether that's some king or a hero during the war, or a ship's captain, a merchant, and we'll see how that shapes the history of Gethra and what world we end up coming up with together, kind of. Now, are we moving into a glacial area yet, or a volcanic area? Yes. So what I've done here is to kind of highlight coastlines where there's tectonic activity, and then I also have across kind of the big thirds here. I've got the kind of glacial areas. So if you look at on Google Earth here, if you look at the further north and south you go on Earth, you have more and more rough coastlines, and that's because the glaciers during the Ice Age, as they withdrew, they kind of scarred the ground more. And so you can see there's in North America, you can see in, let me spin around here, you've got the big fjords and stuff, and really kind of deep inlets and bays across Russia. So it's that kind of thing. But then you also have tectonic activity, which is why you get rough land. Of course, that might be crater as well. But if you look at the Rockies or the Andes and stuff like that, you've got the really rough kind of coastline if you zoom in there, where it's all rocky, and you get lots of islands and stuff when you combine that with the glacier effect. And so that's kind of my reference point here, and then we continue that in Blender. So now we're into this area here, where this entire area is two tectonic plates shifting away from each other, and you've got all of these islands and inlets and stuff that form as a result. So we're going to start getting more rough with the line work here. I'll end up redoing my lines a few times probably, and during this section it's really hard to get it to look like a realistic coastline. But that, of course, is the goal. Got to fill in a few of these segments from earlier. This will be going up on YouTube as well as Twitch, so if you guys have any suggestions, you can always feel free to leave them in the comments on YouTube or in chat here on Twitch. You can tweet at me, whatever you like, and I'm really looking forward to having this become a bit of an interactive community where we can have different, not just not just the stories in Gethra, but what we're kind of how we're telling them and stuff can be something that I'd like to hear from you guys on as well. So, add in some islands. Probably have to go around my globe at some point again and add in even more islands. I'm just kind of doing the major ones now. Add in a big inlet there, cove. Didn't like that one. Okay. The other thing I wanted to check before we continue on here is how far does this zone actually go? Okay, once we start getting around that next bend, that's up there. Okay. All right. Took me a while to figure out how to work with Blender like this. I've watched a few other YouTubers and stuff like that who've done map work like this, and yeah, it's like it's really tricky going from 2D to 3D. Some people, I've actually seen some map makers who've made really spectacular maps, but they entirely do it through trial and error, and they just go back and forth between 2D and Photoshop and a projector that makes it 3D. And I was like, I just don't have the patience for that. So I'm doing it this way here, where we've got, as I've gone now, you guys have seen me draw for a little bit here, and here's all of the line work that I just did. So we can slowly turn it into a 2D image, and make sure that everything looks good both in 3D if we were ever to make an actual physical sphere or a globe of Gethra, and we can also make sure it'll look good in 2D, which is probably the more common way that people will be viewing it. Oops. We have a little island chain here. There we go. We'll just do a little bit more of kind of finish up this zone, and then maybe I'll switch over and do some of the podcast. since it's my first time streaming, I'm going to kind of bounce around a little bit more, and if I continue doing this, we'll kind of widen these time segments. All right, so if anyone wants to follow this as a tutorial, what I'm doing here is basically taking a Blender kind of texture that we've created. It's just a blank texture that I can draw on. And then that's why I have to keep changing it this way, because when you're painting textures in Blender, you can only do essentially painting. You can't erase because you're creating a texture, so it's always displayed, not transparent. So unlike in Photoshop, if you're doing mapping and stuff, you may have some experience with other image editing, and so with that you have usually you would be drawing and erasing and having them on separate layers. But in this, I literally have to paint white over my lines or paint black over the white, as opposed to what you would normally be doing in most programs for this. It's kind of like, it's almost as bad as using Paint in some ways, Microsoft Paint. But with the benefit here that it's in 3D. and converting it for us nicely into 2D. So. All right, coast has got to start smoothing out now, going into the next area. Again, it won't be quite as smooth as some places in this world, but it will be, because there's still glaciers there, or there were in the formation of these coasts, but there will be less of this rugged mountain texture. This area would probably have a lot of volcanoes in it as well, because the tectonic plates are kind of separating, and so you have molten magma and the kind of crust kind of bubbling up into the surface. So it's kind of fun. Most of what Gethra is that cool storytelling we're going to get to later, but it's kind of cool even with the mapping to kind of imagine what these places would be like. I'll have to investigate why my drawing tablet will only let me draw on part of it after the stream. Lots of little islands there. All right, and then we'll do just one more little section here, get the kind of transition back into a slightly smoother coast. All right, there we go. Got a big section there done. Save that. All right, so let me just update my stream info here. We're going to move on to there we go. Going to get the Lives of Gethra podcast going now. So for this, I already saved, but Blender always likes to make sure